Hi, I'm Tess, and this is Blind Crime. With cases like these, you'll never see it coming. Hey guys, and welcome to Blind Crime. With cases like these, you'll never see it coming. So, first and foremost, I have an announcement. Insert drum roll. I am going to be at CrimeCon in Nashville. Yay! I'm not going to be on Creator Row, but I was able to sign up to volunteer. And so, if you guys are going to be at CrimeCon, come find me, because I would love to connect with and meet you guys. And thank you guys in person for listening. I don't know exactly where I'm going to be volunteering at. They haven't sent that information out yet, but I will post on social media when I know so that you guys can know where to find me. But I am so excited. I cannot wait. It's been probably about a year now whenever I first heard of CrimeCon, and I wanted to go so bad, but it was in Orlando, and I just did not have the funds or the possibility of getting there. So for it to be in Nashville, that's much closer to home for me, and I am just super excited about being able to be there, being able to potentially hear some of the people who are going to be speaking, and of course, being able to meet my listeners and the other podcast hosts that I so love and adore. So, I'm super excited about that. I cannot wait, and I hope that I'll get to meet some of y'all up there. All right, we are going to move on and start talking about this case. So, this week we are diving into a case that has absolutely rocked me. I've cried watching trials, and I've gotten emotional recording cases, but I have never sat and bawled my eyes out while reading and researching a case, with the exception of Gannon Stout. But this case got me. I am going to go ahead and give a trigger warning now. It gets graphic. It gets intense. It gets hard. So please listen at your own discretion. I also want to shout out my mom for suggesting this case. I was lost in a sea of options, and my mom sent me this one, and it just gripped me. So thanks, Mom. I hope you enjoy the episode. This might also be more than one part. It depends on how far I am able to get today and record. So we will see what happens, because there is a lot of information, a lot of background, and I love that in a case. I love whenever I can find a lot of background. So most of everything that I found is from the book Our Georgia, written by Lynette Williams, who is Georgia Williams' mother. So I found the audiobook for Our Georgia. I will link that in the description. So I am going to be referencing that a lot, but I want to get that out there first and foremost, that is where a lot of this information comes from. Lynette and Steve Williams were the definition of what is called couple goals. I know that a lot of you know what that means. For the people like me who are kind of falling behind in modern slang, that's just like the it couple, like the ideal couple. So they were young when they met, but when the sparks started flying, they knew that they were meant to be. Coming from the great farmland of England, the expectation for adult children wasn't much more than working for their parents on their farms or in the family business. For Steve Williams, this was exactly what happened. He worked with his grandfather, and while he was proud to be able to provide for his wife and his family, it wasn't what he wanted to do. So Steve, after school, took a job in an office, and this made his grandfather very, very, very proud. In our Georgia, Lynette said that every time his grandfather was introducing him to someone, he would go around and say, "This is Steve, my grandson, and he works in an office." And it was a really, really, really big deal for someone to work in an office and wear a suit and tie to work, because at this time and in this place, that wasn't common. You just kind of did what you could to get by. And most of the time that was working on your parents' farm. But the office life was not what Steve wanted. Ever since he was a kid, he dreamed of being on the police force. At the time, though, there was a height requirement to be on the force, and Steve was about 4 inches too short. So he kept his nose to the ground and continued working his office job. Lynette had been working as soon as she was still in college. That's right. She was still in college, and she began working for this company called Boots, which, from what I was able to gather, was like a pharmaceutical health supply kind of place. And by the time she was 24 years old, she had already been named something like the top salesman of the year. And that was very uncommon, not only for a woman, but of someone her age. Lynette and Steve were in no rush to start a family. They spent 10 years happily married, just the two of them, when the couple found out that they were expecting their oldest daughter, Scarlett. In our Georgia, she said that before work one day, she noticed her pants were tight and could hardly button them. Steve told her maybe she should go to the doctor and see if she was pregnant. Lynette laughed him off, but wound up at the doctor that day, and sure enough, she was expecting. To her surprise, though, the doctor told Lynette not only was she pregnant, but she was already 5 months along. Completely shocked, Lynette immediately went home and told Steve the good news. They were thrilled to be parents, and although they had enjoyed their lives together, they were ready, and now they only had to wait 4 months instead of 9 for their bundle of joy. Lynette said in our Georgia that Scarlett was a really great baby the first few months, but then she became the kind of baby you had to hold all the time, the baby who was into everything. She said Scarlett started walking at just 10 months old, and once she started walking, there was no stopping her. Scarlett loved being outside and in the dirt and finding bugs. Lynette was not a fan, and Scarlett would often find bugs and put them in Lynette's pockets. When I heard that, I immediately thought of The Sound of Music when the Von Trapp kids put the frog in Maria's pocket. Man, that is such a good movie. I need to watch that. Okay, back to the story. When Scarlett was 5 years old, Lynette found out that she was expecting once again. This time they weren't quite as surprised, but they were just as happy and excited. Scarlett was over the moon excited to be a big sister and could not wait until the baby was born. It was during this time that Steve was getting really worn out with his office job. In our Georgia, Lynette said that Steve was losing himself in his work. He wasn't as happy and as carefree as he used to be, and he still dreamed of being a police officer. When the topic came up at dinner one night, Lynette reminded him that the height requirement was no longer in place, so he should give it a try. And while working his full-time job during the week, he was working weekend shifts at the department, studying for their version of the police academy exams. On September 17th, 1995, while Steve was working his weekend shift, Lynette called the station looking for her husband. She was in labor, and Georgia was ready to make her presence known. A short while later, she would make her grand arrival. Lynette said in Our Georgia that Georgia was the total opposite of Scarlett as a baby. She was mellow, mild temper, and only ever cried when she was hungry. And she was hungry a lot. Lynette said that she was a very large baby, and she wasn't very motivated to move around and try to roll over and go from back to tummy or tummy to back or anything like that. She didn't really care to try to sit up on her own. So the chunkiness that she put on, she did not lose very quickly. She took her time in doing things, and she wanted to do them in her own way. And because of how chill she was and how she just didn't really want to do anything, Lynette took her to the doctor just to make sure she was okay. The doctor said that she was fine, and as long as she was eating and sleeping and not sick, there shouldn't be anything to worry about. As Georgia got a little bit bigger, Scarlett would lie on the floor with her and tell her, "Look, it's easy, just do this," while showing her how to roll over and crawl. Again, this made me chuckle. My oldest nephew used to mimic my dog rolling around on the floor and would say, "Aunt T, I'm doing Milo's happy little dance." Oh, just the adorableness that I picture thinking of a big sister trying to teach her little sister how to roll around. I love it. I love it so much. In her own time, though, Georgia began to roll over and eventually crawl and eventually walk. And just like Big Sister, once she was walking, nothing could stop her. Georgia was still very chill, though. In Our Georgia, Lynette talks about how Georgia was a quiet kid, and she would often have imaginary friends. She would also have nightmares, and when asked about what her nightmares were, Georgia would just say, "You don't want to know." Lynette and Steve both agreed that Georgia was a sensitive soul, and the spiritual elements really affected her. There was one instance in Our Georgia where Lynette said that Georgia was outside, and she was talking to someone who wasn't there. Whenever Georgia came back in, Lynette asked, "Who are you talking to outside?" And she said, my grandmother. And it was Steve's mom, who had passed away several months before. And Georgia was still pretty little and didn't have a really great idea of who her grandmother was. She didn't have enough of a memory to know who she was. It was really kind of shocking to them that that's who she said that she was talking to. But I get that. I am a very sensitive soul myself. The spiritual things really get to me. I think it's an empath thing. And honestly, from what I've read and heard about Georgia, she was definitely an empath. As she got older, though, she did grow out of her nightmares and the imaginary friends, but she did have a really hard time making friends. After she started school, Georgia would come home with scrapes and bruises on her hands and knees. At first, Lynette and Steve thought she just fell down on the playground, but after it kept happening, they asked Georgia what was going on. Georgia told them that she was just falling down a lot, and again, Lynette took her to the doctor. But the doctor told her that she didn't have any balance issues or neurological problems, so it might be a muscle thing, and they just need to keep an eye on her. After a few more months of this, Georgia finally broke down when Lynette and Steve asked if she wanted to go to another school. Georgia was being bullied. When the subject came up again of transferring schools, Georgia cried. She said she loved her school and she didn't want to go anywhere else. So Lynette and Steve went and spoke to the school. The bullying didn't stop completely, but it did get better. And the next year, when Georgia's birthday came around, the first person she wanted to invite to her birthday party was the girl who had bullied her. She said if she showed this girl how to be a good friend, maybe they could be friends. I wish I could say this worked out for Georgia, but in the end, it didn't. The girl was nice to her whenever they were alone, but when she was around her school friends, she still gave Georgia a really hard time, and this went on for an indefinite amount of time. Lynette never said when or if it ended. But Georgia persisted, and she didn't let the bully stop her. She was still as kind and as sweet as ever, and after the family bought a new house in Telford, a girl down the road immediately took Georgia under her wing, and from that point on, they were inseparable. As time went on, Georgia excelled in everything she did. She was a great student, a great friend, and while she was a bit of an outsider, she was okay with that for the most part. As Georgia grew up, she became to be more confident in herself. In Our Georgia, Lynette says that Georgia wasn't a girly girl by any means. She wore jeans and sweatshirts, or as they say in the UK, jumpers. I love how British people talk. It wasn't until Georgia was going to her prom did she wear a dress and do her hair and makeup. Lynette said that Georgia was absolutely beautiful and felt like a real girl with a woman's figure. She was tall and thin, outgrowing her baby chunk, but she did have some curve to her as she got older. Her signature look was her box-dyed bright red hair. It was in school that Georgia would become affiliated with the British equivalent of the ROTC. She absolutely loved it. The bond she was making, the camaraderie she had found, this was her place, and she knew it. Georgia was good at it too. During her last year of school, her school was chosen for a special task of building a plane for the Royal Air Force. Like an actual plane. Georgia worked so hard, and although the plane wouldn't be finished by the time she graduated, she was determined to get as much of it done as she could while she was there. During her time with this junior Royal Air Force, I can't remember exactly what it was called, her nickname became Ferret. She was always running around and popping up by people's sides, making sure they had everything they needed. Their uniforms were in check, and if someone needed a scarf or a hat or a pin, Georgia was right there with whatever they needed. She was the glue that held this group together in so many ways. After, secondary school, Georgia went to local college and was trying to figure out what she wanted to do. Ultimately, she wanted to join the Royal Air Force, but at that time, women weren't allowed to be on the front lines and fight. So she was a bit lost on what she wanted to do for the rest of her life. After meeting with her advisor before the end of the school year in 2013, Georgia had decided that she was going to be a paramedic for the Royal Air Force. It was the closest she could get to becoming a soldier, and it would keep her in on the action and helping people in need. She could either go to school to become a paramedic and then join the Royal Air Force, or go ahead and join the Royal Air Force and they would pay for her schooling and she wouldn't have to take some of the outdoor courses she was worried about. Georgia was an excellent student, but her outdoor skills were not the best. While Scarlett had grown up and loved the outdoors and being outside and playing with bugs, Georgia was not like that at all. And while Georgia was really good working with her hands, the Girl Scout stuff was not her thing. So she went with option B and planned to sign up for the Royal Air Force after the school year ended that summer. The week of May 26, 2013, Georgia was going to be busy. She had plans for almost every day that week, driving lessons with her dad, a concert with her friends and her boyfriend, a weekend trip with a stop in Paris, and helping a friend with a photo shoot for his portfolio, just to name a few things. Lynette says in Our Georgia that the two of them went shopping on the morning of the 26th, buying a new pair of orange pants and a blue blazer for her upcoming trip. She was going to wear the outfit in Paris. Orange and blue were her favorite colors. When they got back home, Georgia decided to touch up her red hair before asking her dad if they could do an early driving lesson that afternoon. He was in the middle of getting the grill ready for a backyard cookout, so he promised her that they would go later in the week. She was upset at first because she knew she had a really busy week, but decided to go get ready for her photo shoot with her friend Jamie instead. Jamie had asked her multiple times to do this photo shoot. He was trying to work on his photography skills and needed some help, as in models. While he had asked Georgia had said no several times. Jamie had a thing for her, and she did not feel the same way. Georgia had a boyfriend, and she was very happy with him. He was a sweet guy. He brought her flowers, and they got along really well. So when Jamie made his feelings known, Georgia tried to let him down gently but surely, not leading him on or making him think that there was any kind of hope that they would ever be in an actual relationship. She wanted to be friends with Jamie, but Jamie never really fully let go of the idea of them being an item. It was a bit unsettling to Lynette and Steve that Jamie wanted their daughter to come take photos. At this time, Georgia was 17 and Jamie was 22, so he was a little bit older. He wanted her to come to his house, and they just didn't have a good feeling about it. Lynette says in Our Georgia, she told Georgia that there better not be any kind of topless or nude photos before asking Georgia just not to go. Georgia told Lynette that it was like a biker photo shoot and her friends would be on a motorcycle, and that she couldn't back out on Jamie because she had promised him and he was a friend, and she couldn't go back on her promise. She also said that since her friends would be there, she would be totally fine. And knowing that Georgia's friends were also going to be there made Lynette and Steve feel somewhat better about it. Georgia hugged and kissed her parents goodbye and began walking down the road to the house of Jamie Reynolds. Jamie Reynolds was 22 at the time, and he worked at a shop right down the road from where the Williams family lived. He had gone to college while still living with his parents and was still trying to figure out what he was going to do with his life. His latest fascination was with photography, or at least that's what he told people. Like I said before, Jamie had a thing for Georgia. He thought she was absolutely beautiful with her red hair. He liked redheads. Jamie was a bit of an odd fellow. He wasn't very put together. He was into heavy metal music, and he liked a lot of weird TV shows and movies. Not weird like your typical nerdy kind of weird, like anime, Pokemon, stuff like that, but like torture stuff. Think of the movie Hostel or the Saw movies. I think Hostel is what I'm thinking of. Anyway, Jamie didn't have a lot of friends, and he didn't really fit in anywhere, and he never really had a girlfriend. He did have one good friend who did an interview that I will have in the show notes. You guys can go check it out. But this friend told him that he just needed to ask a girl out. The worst she could do was say no. But Jamie had had a repetition of no's, including Georgia's. When he asked her to help him out by modeling for him and she told him no, he all but begged her and eventually manipulated her with guilt until she said yes. He'd asked several of her friends and other mutual friends as well, and according to him, several of them were going to be there for this photo shoot. His main goal, though, was to get Georgia and her beautiful red hair on camera. Georgia was under the guise that this was going to be a photo shoot involving motorcycles, a biker chick kind of look. She dressed in what she thought was a biker attire and headed off to Jamie's, feeling a bit reluctant to go, but never willing to break a promise to a friend. When Georgia arrived at Jamie's home, none of the other friends were there. It was just her and Jamie. No one knows what the conversation was that took place between the two, but Georgia decided to go ahead on with the photo shoot. And we know that because of the photos that were later found on Jamie's computer. But we'll get to that. Instead of a biker chick setup, Jamie wanted to do a simulation hanging shoot, where it would look like Georgia was hanging herself without actually hanging. He'd hoisted a rope around a beam in the house and had a box underneath it. He had Georgia change her clothes and step up onto the box before sliding her neck into the noose. Jamie took photos, I'm sure probably chatting with Georgia and telling her how to pose and which way to hold her head and her arms and her feet. But after a few snaps of his camera, Jamie stepped away and went back behind Georgia, where he then grabbed the rope and kicking the box out from underneath her feet. Jamie had set a timer on his camera to take more photos while he held a fighting Georgia by her neck with the rope. After a few minutes, Georgia's body went limp and Jamie went back to his camera and took even more photos. I'm going to give another trigger warning here, so be aware. After killing Georgia and taking photos of her death and while she was dying, Jamie took Georgia's body down from the beam and laid her down, then undressed her. He raped her lifeless body in front of the camera, not only once, but numerous times, taking her to different rooms all over the house and photographing each event. After he was done pleasing himself with her body, Jamie wrapped her up in a blanket and put her body in the back of his dad's van. Back at the Williams home, Lynette and Steve were growing a bit worried about their daughter. It was later than she would usually get home, and even though she was 17, she still had a curfew. They tried to call her, and no answer. They tried to text, and got no response. Eventually, Lynette says in our Georgia, she finally got a text from Georgia telling her that she had gone home with a friend and her phone was dying, so she would talk to her later. Lynette never got a text from her daughter again. All day the next day, Steve and Lynette paced back and forth, waiting on Georgia to come home. Scarlett had called some of Georgia's friends to see if she was with them, but no one had seen, and none of them had heard from her. She also found out that none of the other friends had gone to Jamie's after all. They'd all backed out last minute. Scarlett then called Jamie, and he told her that Georgia had left with friends, and that he hadn't heard anything from her since. Scarlett thought this was odd since the friends said they hadn't been there, but thought maybe the wires got crossed or she misheard one of them. Lynette called Georgia's phone tirelessly, eventually having it go straight to voicemail. She thought Georgia had turned off her phone and that she was finally becoming a rebellious teenager. Something just didn't feel right to Lynette. That afternoon, Lynette called Georgia's boyfriend, who hadn't heard from Georgia either. They were supposed to be going to a concert together that night, though, and surely someone would let them know when she got there. Maybe even tell Georgia to call her mom on their phone if hers was really dead. Lynette said in our Georgia that she expected Georgia to at least come home and change clothes before the concert, but she didn't. As the day turned into night, Scarlett told Lynette that she was going to go home. Georgia had said something about staying at her place that night after the concert, so she didn't have to worry about trying to get home super late, and everyone was on board with that, and Scarlett wanted to be there in case Georgia showed up. The night went on, and no one had seen or heard from Georgia still. At this point, Lynette and Steve were furious. Georgia had never done anything like this. She'd never gone off with her friends and turned off her phone or not come home when she was supposed to. She was about to be 18 and was going to be able to do what she wanted, but she was still a good kid, and it wasn't like her to act like this. Lynette tried calling her again and again and again, and still nothing. She finally talked to Georgia's boyfriend after the concert, and he told her that Georgia never showed up. This worried Lynette and Steve even more. Georgia had really wanted to go see this concert, and she was really looking forward to spending time with her friends and her boyfriend. For a flash of a second, Lynette and Steve thought that maybe Georgia and Jamie had run away together, but Lynette shot that thought down as quickly as it came. Georgia really liked her boyfriend. They were really serious. They wanted a future together. And Georgia was all about loyalty and not breaking promises. She wouldn't break a promise of monogamy with her boyfriend. The night continued to go on, and neither Lynette nor Steve slept. When Lynette got out of bed the next morning, Steve told her he thought it was time to call the police. And as much as I hate to do this, I am going to have to cut this episode here. I tried recording the whole thing, and it is too much for one episode. So we will be bringing part 2 of Georgia Williams' story in 2 weeks. So 2 weeks from today. It is May 17th, 2024. So on May 31st, which is going to be CrimeCon weekend. So you will have another episode to listen to while you are driving to Nashville to come and find me. I cannot wait to see you guys. I cannot wait to meet you guys. It is going to be amazing. I know it. I'm so looking forward to it. I hope to learn so much. And I think that it is going to be an incredible opportunity for everyone who is able to be there. So I really hope that you guys can make it. So yeah, be sure to watch out for that episode in 2 weeks. And yeah, I'm sorry that I had to cut it short, but like I said, it's just too much. All right, guys, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. Go ahead and leave me a 5-star review wherever you're listening from, because you know that really, really, really helps me out. Send this to someone who loves a good true crime story. And until next time, keep your eyes open.